So this is interesting. The camera is not working very appropriately either. Keeps taking like 15-second videos and then turns off. So that's not good. So those Chinese, they're the ones that run this camera. So probability usually gives you formulas so you can figure out what your chances are. So if you have dice that you're rolling and you're trying to figure out what's the chance that I'll have snake eyes or whatever, you could actually calculate that pretty easily. The thing is, it's just a statistical chance that you'll get whatever it is you calculate. So if you have a 1 in 15 chance of getting whatever it is you're calling for, just the probability that you have a 1 in 15 chance doesn't mean you're actually going to have that success. Even if there's only 1% chance of something not being the case, that could be the case. I mean, that's the nature of chance. So really, what's always been obvious to me is that dealing with formulas and things to try to give you a handle on chance is really just a psychological tool to try to give you some level of confidence, But what I do find interesting is the way people use probability in their arguments. And what I have up on the screen is the beginnings of a book by Charles Murray, who wrote a book called Human Accomplishment, which I found absolutely fascinating. It was years ago. I could pull up the page, on when the book was. I'm thinking it was probably late 1990s, maybe 2000. The internet was there and Google was there. And that was the main source of investigation that Charles Murray used in trying to establish what human accomplishments were the ones that were the best. And how did he do that? Well, he basically went on to Google and he asked Google, about, how many people listen to Beethoven? How many people listen to the Beatles? How many people, and he ended up accumulating a chart for all these different subjects, the sciences, art, music, all these different things. And the question was, what are the greatest human accomplishments? And statistically, he pulled his results from Google. So if Google had more people like Beethoven than Mozart, then he went ahead and said, well, so Beethoven was a greater composer than Mozart, just by a bit. But neck and neck, Beethoven's slightly better than Mozart. And so you ended up with a list of who the best musicians were, the composers rather, who the best artists were, and they're not a surprise at all. They're all the ones that you typically hear about. But his decision that these are actually the best of that class of accomplishment, totally based on the statistical pull that he got from Google, seemed like that's no way at all to do that kind of research, or how you would even make that kind of overall conclusion. Do you like Beethoven? Yeah. So that's what I would expect actually from most people that I know. There are people that really like Beethoven. I like Beethoven. I got to hear lots of Beethoven. When I was a kid, I have collected all the 9 symphonies of Beethoven. Fidelio, his one opera, is, I think, one of the worst operas that anyone ever wrote that gets on occasion performed, which is, I think, indicative of just how bad Fidelio is as an opera. Beethoven was a good composer of symphony orchestras playing symphonies, and I think his violin concerto and his piano concertos, they're classics, but his opera was terrible. And his entertainment for people, back in the day of Beethoven and others, so you're looking at the 1820s, 1830s at the most. The kind of entertainment people had in the evening, if they were wealthy enough to have time to spend entertaining themselves. Typically, people, especially in the German communities where Beethoven lived, bought instruments, and they would have groups of people come over to their houses, and they'd sit around in the evening, and however many of them came would sit there and play music together. And so what they needed was music for 4 or 5 people, maybe 3 people. So what they had were trios, quartets, quintets, things of that sort. So a lot of the composers, basically to earn money, it wasn't big money, of course, but they would write pieces for these folks who could sit around in the evening and play 1 or 2 violins, a viola, a piano maybe, if they had one, that kind of gathering. And when you listen to those, they're not really very entertaining. They're fun to play. And that's what they were for. They were fun to entertain people who had a musical instrument and wanted to sit and play with their friends. And, you get to have almost like an argument as you're going back and forth between the different instruments, picking up the lead, melody, and the others, playing in the background. And so it's a fun task to sit and play through some of these pieces, but it's not really very entertaining to listen to. That's just at least my opinion on that, right? And the kind of people today that would listen to Beethoven are probably people that are taking musical education and studying those kinds of instruments. And you could probably statistically look and see how many people there are that are learning those instruments. I doubt that it's a really big number. And oddly, this is an interesting thing to me, that the so-called tiger moms, if you're familiar with them, have you ever heard of those? So they've been labeled tiger moms because they're so fixed on having their child, usually one, become an absolute master at something from the very beginning, so that the young child at just 3 or 4 years old is learning music, learning math, learning so much stuff that the child is basically not a child. And it's constant. And that program actually works, so that the kids that come from that end up, there are some interesting examples. You can become a golfer, a world famous golfer, from, a dad helping you with that. But a lot of musicians end up being absolutely amazing. I think Yo-Yo Ma is a perfect example of that, if you've ever heard of him. He's a cellist. Been playing the cello since before he was big enough to hold a cello. Now the thing is, when Charles Murray did his evaluation using Google to find out what composers were the best composers in the world, the only kind of people that he would have been able to research, I think, would have been limited to people that are like that. So the kinds of composers that they were familiar with would have been those kinds of classical composers. So he ends up concluding, for example, that even Japanese people like Beethoven more than any Japanese composer. I found that an example of something absolutely outstanding. So let's look at, this is his explanation of the book, Human Accomplishment. It's not about the psychological nature of genius and creativity, although there's lots of people that are interested in that. But in this book, he focuses on how the realization of genius and creative potential has varied across times and places. So this is a certain view of the world. Now is a good time to declare that subtext explicitly. So how's he doing this book? How's he evaluating? So this is, in a sense, certainly a probability argument where he's concluding what sort of things are the best. To celebrate human accomplishment is to embrace a heroic view of mankind and its destiny. I am joining with the view expressed once in these words: what varieties has man found out in buildings, attires, husbandry, navigation, sculpture, and painting? What millions of inventions has he in arms, engines, stratagems, and the like? What thousands of medicines for the health of eloquent phrases to delight, of verses for pleasure, of musical inventions and instruments? How large is the capacity of man if we should dwell upon particulars? So he mentioned some specific individuals. There is disillusionment. We might feel that ourselves. It's kind of interesting. A very similar type of a probability or statistical argument comes from people like Steven Pinker in his books, The Better Angels of Our Nature, or Enlightenment Now. And what he typically ends up doing is, everybody feels like it's such a depressing world. Everything is, war here, global warming there, illnesses infecting us here, the economy falling apart here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he points out, when you look at the actual statistics, this is the best it's ever been. This is the best time it has ever been to be alive and human, and our world is just absolutely amazing, with all of the benefits, all the technologies, the food resources. It's just absolutely the best time it has ever been in world history to be a human being living today. Now, the thing is, if you're in Gaza and you just had your house blown up and you're lucky to be still alive, that obviously doesn't apply to you. But it is easy for me to see that if he's talking about, in general, wow, boy, we have it made in the shade here. Most of us, I think, we're living on the edge of the frontier, and you don't mind. You're obviously the one person I get to see, so I'm talking. But so we're living in a place where you're as close to nature really as you can get, and still have all the benefits of so-called civilization. So I think we're really lucky living here. And by the way, I think the University of Alaska is the best university in the world. Not just because I teach here, although that's certainly a big part of it. But if you think about any other place, you'd have to live somewhere else. And I know we have at least one student who's in Virginia, because they moved because of the military. they're still in the course, but that's but basically, yeah, I mean, you could go to an Ivy League school, and the pressures and the problem of living in Boston or living in Philadelphia, or I mean, I've been to those places. I know, okay, there's benefits there, but at the same time, the overall balance, I don't think really makes things